100% オレンジジュース
It's a game that many of you have been looking forward to. However, 5 games stand between us and must be overcome first. So today, let's finish all of them. My name is Graeldon. I'm on an impossible journey to review every Steam game in alphabetical order, and today we're playing 100 Vacas, 100 Worlds Escape the Room, 100 Years War, $100, and 100% Challenge. Let's begin. If you've played Stardew Valley, then you might know about the playable arcade machines tucked away inside of the Stardrop Saloon. One of these games is called Journey of the Prairie King, a top-down shooter where you fend off waves of bad guys and collect upgrades. There's a rare achievement for beating the game, and you even get a special heart event with Abigail where you get to play the game in a co-op mode, which is pretty neat. 100 Vacas is not that game, but it does look pretty similar. Developed by Eduardo Alonso and Hernan Marandino and published by Grit Maniacs, 100 Vacas released onto Steam on the 18th of August 2020 and has received a grand total of 20 reviews, all of which are positive. And if you know anything about my channel, you'll know that's pretty unusual, and it just begs the question, why isn't it more popular? So, let's take a look and see what it has to offer. Similar to Journey of the Prairie King, 100 Vacas is also a top-down twin-stick shooter with a western theme, and it also doesn't have a main menu, throwing the player straight into the action. There is a settings menu, but the game doesn't feel the need to show it to us at the start, so in order to oblige them, we won't look at it at the start. Controls are simple: WASD to move and the mouse to aim, and left click to shoot. The game is made of a series of screens, each filled with a bunch of enemies and some cows. The goal is equally simple: shoot the enemies and don't let the cows die. Much like in real life, things die when they get shot, and here everything dies in one hit, including you. Speaking of you, the main character is unnamed, so let's welcome back Barry. That's right, Barry, not Larry, because Larry is actually coming up later in the video. Barry's mother is unwell, and medical care is horrendously expensive, so much so that Barry basically needs to round up and sell all 100 cows, which in the 2025 economic climate comes out to around $3,500 per cow, or $350,000 in total. Now, I'm sure that there's a medical care is expensive joke here somewhere, but given that this game is set in Mexico, not the US, and the current world events, that feels a bit distasteful. If anything, this just tells me I'm in the wrong industry, because I had no idea cows were worth that much, but as we're about to find out, I'm not sure any amount of hazard pay could convince me that it's worth changing careers right now. This is mostly due to the deluge of bandits that have overrun the ranch, making it a much more complicated and risky task to round up the herd. This is mostly due to the cows having the skill set of a world-class baseball outfielder, but one that catches bullets instead of balls. The result is a fast-paced, challenging shooter that requires some careful and strategic planning in order to get the best outcome, but the reality is that you'll be making split-second decisions because the cows are stupid and seem to act as magnets for the bullets, constantly wandering into the line of fire. Levels slowly increase in difficulty by adding more enemies, changing enemy placements, or by adding obstacles that are either used as cover or to hide dangers. The individual levels have been designed in such a way that there is definitely an optimal solution for each one, which creates some interesting speedrunning potential for gamers interested in that. For the rest of us, it's worth knowing that managing to save every cow in a stage will give you an extra life, and there are achievements for beating the game with all 100 cows alive, or for Barry never incurring a medical bill of his own. Make it to the final stage, and Barry will have a showdown against the leader of the bandits, after which a short cutscene plays that changes depending on the number of cows you manage to save. Not sure what Barry will do if his mother falls ill again next year, but that's a problem for later. Gameplay in 100 Vacas is equal parts fun and frustrating, but thanks to the tight controls and short nature of the game, it never takes long to jump back in for another round. The enemy AI does feel a bit unpredictable though, as I'm sure I've seen different movement patterns in response to me doing the same thing, but it might just be that I wasn't paying close enough attention. Given my performance in the game, both things are equally likely. It did take me several tries to reach the end successfully, amounting to about 45 minutes of playtime, which for $8.5 dues is maybe a bit short, but still acceptable considering the replayability if you're a perfectionist aiming for a perfect run. Speaking of finishing the game, here is the settings menu that is only available if you actually pause. There are actually more customization options than I was expecting considering the nature of the game, so I'm pleasantly surprised by the range of audio options, pleasantly non-surprised by the lack of graphical options, and pleasantly pleased to see a built-in speedrun timer. That's a nice touch that shows they know their intended target audience. And that bittersweet fact makes me all the more sad that this game has been overlooked, as it falls firmly into that bucket of short and sweet games that know exactly what they want to be and achieve exactly that. It's a brief experience, but a polished one. And that's why my final rating for 100 Vacas is defeat. There are no cows alive, in a level that never had any cows in it, out of 10. Sometimes you can do everything right and still not get the outcome you want. Jumping from a game that adheres to the idea that less is more straight to a game that falls into more is less, it's time to look at 100 Worlds Escape the Room. If you've been keeping up with content on this channel, you might recognize Mia from the 100 Doors video, and yes, this game is indeed by the same developers, Pixel. Released on Steam on the 16th of December 2022, 100 Worlds is set in the same universe as the previous games, but given a completely different naming convention, for reasons. I don't want to spend too much time on this game because, to absolutely no one's surprise, it's almost identical to the other games from these developers. Mia is browsing books in a library, finds a magical book, and is transported inside, where she meets the cat Balthazar, who challenges her to complete 100 puzzles in order to leave. This is basically all the story you're going to get, but Balthazar and Mia do have other brief conversations scattered throughout the game. The majority of these are basically along the lines of Mia saying, "You didn't think I could do that, did you?" and Balthazar telling her not to get cocky because there are still more puzzles to solve. So yeah, don't expect any award-winning narratives here. Each level involves interacting with the environment in various ways by using or combining items, or solving interactive puzzles to find a key and open a fishbowl. At first, I was confused as to why it was fishbowls of all things, but then I noticed the all too brief animation at the end of the level, and it made sense. We're complicit in fish murder. This entire game is nothing more than an elaborate 100-course meal for Balthazar the Insatiable. Speaking of the end of the level, the scores are back, only this time they feel more arbitrary than ever, as there is no scale of reference, and while they seem to be time-based, there is no par time to benchmark yourself against. It all feels like an episode of Whose Line Is It Anyway, where the puzzles are made up nonsense and the points don't matter. Only they kind of do, as there is a global leaderboard. And Sandler_B, the person who holds first place by a significant margin, somehow managed to score an average of more than 2,500 points in every level, whereas I was struggling to consistently get a score with 4 digits. I have a theory though, and it's as simple as realizing that this game also uses the skip mechanic, which is not only incentivized by having Steam achievements specifically for skipping levels, but also because the game still awards a score even if you skipped a level. I'd show you the options screen, but it's exactly the same as the previous ones, so blank, I'd appreciate it if you could flash it up for exactly 1 frame for the 2 viewers that actually want to confirm this. Thanks. Moving on to the end of the game, the story doesn't exactly wrap up or come to a conclusion so much as just end. And of course there is a screen that claims that more levels are coming soon. But if you recall, this game was released in 2022 and there haven't been any additional levels released yet. So, going by their measure of time, I hope that we get to see another game from Pixel soon. Sass and sarcasm aside, 100 Worlds might actually be the best of these games that Pixel has released. My playthrough took about 3.5 hours and was mostly bug-free, although there were a couple of levels that I was certain I had the right solution for, even though it didn't accept it, but that's probably a skill issue. The art is actually pretty lovely, with some detailed backgrounds as well as some animated parts like the space whale in one of the levels. The interactable objects felt less obvious and out of place than in other games, and the music, while limited, was also less repetitive. I feel like they actually leaned into the fantasy world aesthetic quite well, creating a variety of levels that felt much less repetitive than seeing Prison Cell Number 5 for the 20th time. As with the other games, the difficulty of the puzzles can vary wildly, with some taking upwards of 15 to 20 minutes to complete, and others only taking a minute or two. And these can be back to back. I think there were just as many illogical solutions here as in previously reviewed games, but they felt more reasonable in a fantasy setting where things don't always make sense anyway. Oh, and they actually had exactly 100 levels, so they get bonus points for correctly counting. But as we know, the points don't matter. It's worth keeping in mind that the game does cost $14.50 dues, but if you enjoy puzzle games, you'll probably have a decent time here. Yes, there are better games like this out there, but there are certainly much, much worse. Trust me. So, with that said, my final rating for 100 Worlds Escape the Room is Balthazar out of 10. I'm pretty sure they are a self-insert for the devs given how greedy and repetitive they are, but you have to acknowledge that it's a pretty decent design nonetheless. This is normally where I'd insert a clever segue to link the two games together, but I honestly can't think of one, so, here's another game with the number 100 in the title. Nailed it. History has never been a strong subject for me, and after playing 100 Years War, a historical turn-based strategy game that references actual events and historical figures, I can't say that much has changed. Now, I'm not saying that every historically accurate game needs to be teaching the player something, but I thought I'd maybe learn a few fun facts here or there, and other than that the key players were the English and the French, but is anyone really surprised that the English were involved, I can't recall the name of any of the important figures. Maybe this is a me problem though, as today's technology has reduced our attention spans to a mere fraction of what they used to be. Or maybe giant walls of text simply aren't the most engaging or memorable way to convey information. I'll let you be the judge. Developed by Hex War Games, published by Hunted Cow Games, and released onto Steam on the 9th of August 2019, a quick glance at the dev's Steam page is all that's needed to know that historically accurate hex-based strategy games are their bread and butter. And jam. And, well, their entire diet, really. I guess if you know your niche, it's good to double down on it, although you have to question how wise that decision is when the majority of games got a neutral review score or a total of less than 10 reviews. Still, we shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but by its contents. And in the case of 100 Years War, it's really freaking boring. Before we get too into the specifics, I need to address the fact that I haven't actually finished the game. For the first time in a while, I actually hit the 8-hour time limit, which was enough time for me to complete the majority of the English campaign. So there is a sizable amount of content here, even if all of it is as mediocre as the majority of peasants recruited to fight in this war. I also use the term campaign rather loosely, because if you're expecting a story with a charismatic lead character following a narrative from start to finish, then prepare to be disappointed. What we actually have is little more than a series of individual levels or scenarios held together by giant walls of text that assume you already know and recognize the names of historical figures. The result is a historical retelling that is all but impossible to follow for the average player because it jumps from location to location, noble to noble, and one generic map to the next. There's no time or reason to build connection to any of the characters because that's not the focus here. The gameplay is. Or at least I assume it is, because there isn't exactly much else on offer. Anyway, we're getting ahead of ourselves. First things first, the menu and settings. The title screen is fine. It certainly prioritizes function first, and that's okay. I'll address some of these buttons in a moment because they don't all work how you would expect, but for now, let's look at the settings. Graphics are limited to HD, Auto, and SD, although I'm not sure what potato can't run this on HD settings. There are resolution settings, and in a show of how polished this game is, changing the resolution instantly restarts the game. Music and sound effects are simply on or off, no sliders, and we have a button that unlocks all of the missions. Helpful if in a moment of insanity you decide you want to play a specific mission again after deleting your save files. Moving into the help section, there is a button that when clicked simply explains what the game is about. It's almost like the devs are assuming that you picked this game up by accident in some kind of bundle and then also managed to install and launch it without ever checking the Steam page. A quite impressive achievement, really. It's also here that you'll find the tutorial. While this is fairly extensive, providing explanations for everything from selecting units to moving to combat, it fails to explain many things. How does terrain height impact combat? How do you tell units to retreat when attacked? What is shock and why is it a combat value? What do these symbols mean? No, really, what do they mean? In all fairness, the tutorial does a good job of acquainting you with the basics, and the basics are enough to carry you through most of the game, at least on normal difficulty. In short, units are divided into 4 types: infantry, cavalry, ranged, and other. Within these groups, they can be classed depending on their equipment: light, medium, and heavy. Unlike Fire Emblem style games, there's no rock, paper, scissors style weapon triangle here. Instead, it's a numbers and gear game. Heavily armoured troops will almost always beat anything else. The difference is that light units can move through any space, including buildings. Medium troops gain combat advantages for attacking from cover, such as forests, and heavy troops are strong. Combat boils down to dice rolls. When 2 units engage, attacks are simultaneous, so there's no attacker advantage. Each unit alive, out of a score of 10 usually, gives you 1 attack, and the chance of the attack landing successfully is modified by a number of factors as shown in the information panel. The more points your score is above your opponent's score, the better your chance of landing hits. While this is a relatively simple concept, this is needlessly complicated by how the information is displayed. Outside of the fact that the windows are often too large to fit on the screen or vanish off the side of the screen into the void, making them unreadable, the side that shows your troops will switch from left to right depending on where the units are located, rather than always having your units on one side and the enemy units on the other side. Frustratingly, outside of a few instances where you can achieve a 100% hit chance, you're usually looking at around 40 to 50%, which is very difficult to plan tactically around. You'll see this even in some optimal matchups, because often both sides have the exact same troops, so you're just rolling the dice and hoping it's in your favour, and weirdly enough, this doesn't make you feel like a tactical genius. And that's assuming the enemy troops don't just run away as soon as you engage in combat, wasting your entire attack. That said, this only applies to melee units. Ranged units can attack from around 3 to 4 tiles away, and can attack after moving, making it easy to kite enemies. Sure, you'll usually only deal 1 to 3 points of damage, but if your enemies literally can't reach you, then it's just a matter of being patient and you'll win eventually. Also, if a melee unit moves into range to attack a ranged unit, the ranged unit will fire a volley to weaken them and then counter-attack as well, essentially getting 2 attacks for the price of 1. Outside of these units, there are special ones like cannons and generals, which are actually non-combat units, but they can be merged with any other unit and provide offensive and defensive buffs to nearby units. However, you'll often lose the game if they die. I actually like this idea as it makes for interesting risk-reward decision making, but it's annoying as all heck when the enemy general that you need to kill to win keeps merging with other units, forcing you to kill them off one by one rather than assassinate them outright. The levels themselves mostly follow the structure of kill X% of the enemy, or survive Y number of turns, or capture Z objective. Certainly not reinventing the wheel, but not breaking it either. Except for when mission critical information is only displayed for a few seconds at the top of the screen before vanishing forever. Thanks, game. I guess I didn't really need to know how to get those reinforcements anyway. As I mentioned before though, actual events are nigh impossible to follow unless you're already familiar with the history of the war. This could have easily been eliminated through the use of short talking head style cutscenes where key characters discuss decisions, or by showing locations on a map with troop movements overlaid to get an idea of where battles are taking place. Alternatively, you could pull a Fire Emblem 7 by having the player fulfill the role of a tactician as they're moved from one battle to the next. Perhaps though, I'm simply not the right audience and this game is aimed towards the history buffs that are laughing at my low IQ takes. I apologise to all 5 of you for not meeting your standards. The end result though is that trying to build a connection with this game is like trying to make friends with a brick wall. It's like it's not even trying, so why should I? When your general with more titles than your local library gets skewered on the end of a lance, you don't really care. There's no emotional connection. Games like Fire Emblem and StarCraft do this really well, and even games like Age of Empires get you to care about your units because you spend time building them up. Whereas here, you're just given a bunch at the start of each mission. Speaking of Age of Empires, I think it's a huge missed opportunity that there is no inclusion of a multiplayer mode here. The war between the English and French sides should have made this a no-brainer for 1v1 PvP battles, but no. You'll play the campaign mode and you'll like it. That said, that's not even the worst sin committed by this game. No. That honour goes to the fact that this is a mobile port, and that the app version is sold for less. Thanks, devs. Yeah, you heard me right, this is a mobile port. The Steam version was released in August 2019, whereas the mobile version was released in July 2019. There's no chicken or egg situation here, we know which one came first, and that means that the Steam version is officially a mobile port. In the iOS store, 100 Years War is available for $4.99 redues, and it's $4.89 redues in the Google Play Store. On Steam, however, you'd better be prepared to fork over $14.50 redues, nearly 3 times the price. And of course, the entire game is played with the mouse. Sadly, 100 Years War is yet another of these cases where the game itself isn't broken enough to make it instantly classified as a bad game, but it's just boring, lifeless, uninteresting. It does nothing to stand out, and my theory is that it doesn't want to. Judging by the other games from the same devs, they've made a base system and have found a cost-effective way of producing new games by reskinning old ones with new levels and themes. They likely have a small, very niche core audience that enjoy the slower pace and historical nature of their games, and they are content with that. To me though, that doesn't excuse a lack of creativity and innovation. That's just laziness. These games could be better, and with the number of games out there to draw inspiration from, they should be better. And so, during my entire 8 hours of playtime, my most prominent feeling was that of disappointment. Don't get me wrong, boredom was a close second, but that's a competition between 2 losing teams when it comes to game enjoyment. At the end of the day, I wouldn't recommend this game to anyone. Simple as that. I'm saddened that I had to play it, and I'm now not looking forward to playing their other games in the future. So with that in mind, my final rating for 100 Years War is off-screen text out of 10. That's okay, I'd rather not see it anyway. Moving on by moving backwards, it's time for another game by the devs that brought us 100 Rub, Operation Global Denomination. Larry the Purse is back for a whole new adventure in $100, and we know we're off to a great start when the devs either don't know or don't care that the dollar symbol is meant to go in front of the numbers. Oh boy. Now, I know this is likely just a translation error as the devs appear to be Russian, but as a result I am not calling this $100. Instead, this shall be $100. Because we wouldn't want to cause any confusion when searching for the game now, would we? Released on the 1st of Feb 2019, developed and published by Kuko, this is technically the origin story of Larry the Purse. To get it out of the way up front, the game only costs $1.5 dues, but there is a bundle available for all 3 of these games by Kuko. Yes, there is a third one, can't wait for that. And for some unknowable reason, the game costs more in the bundle than it does to buy it alone. Oh, and there is a DLC art book available that also costs $1.5 dues and has 28 immaculate pages of Larry the Purse goodness, just in case what you were missing in your life was more sketches of anthropomorphic purses. Hey, I won't judge. Much. Moving on to the game itself, the main menu somehow looks as though it could have been improved by creating it in Paint. To avoid any language issues, everything is represented by symbols, so we have play, sound on off, full screen / windowed mode, credits, exit game, and a wonderful button that deletes your save file. It's basic, but so is the rest of the game. I'll still be docking points for not having a level selection menu though. Although, after you see the gameplay, you might be wondering why you would want to replay any of the levels. $100 is basically a full game version of those ice sliding puzzles from early Zelda or Pokemon games, so I hope you enjoy watching a PNG slide from point A to point B, because that's what the entirety of this game is. That does make me wonder though, where did this type of puzzle originate from? If someone could track down the answer, that'd be cool to know from a game dev perspective. Anyway, the goal of each of the 30 levels is to collect all the $ and then touch the exit block. To the devs' credit, they do try to make things interesting by adding some additional mechanics like comets that reset you if you touch them, landmines that only allow you to pass over them for a few seconds, or levels with multiple Larrys that are controlled simultaneously. To the devs' discredit, there is only one tile set used, one piece of music, and one sound effect for collecting $. Many of the levels were also designed to be as long and frustrating as possible, with obstacles either added late into the level or scattered throughout that require precise timing to avoid, otherwise you'll reset back to the start. There was one level in particular that I was stuck on for over 20 minutes, and this game only took about an hour to beat. Let me repeat that for emphasis and elaborate. One level made up 1/3 of this game's playtime because it was designed to be frustrating on purpose and to bump up the playtime and increase the chances of the player taking at least 2 hours to beat the game and therefore not being able to refund it. Pretty dodgy way to design a supposedly relaxing puzzle game if you ask me. Oh, and I'm sure you've noticed the barrage of pop-ups in the lower right by now, so to address the elephant in the room, this game has achievement spam. Beating the final level rewards you with the outro, where Larry is picked up again by his owner. Or is he? Because the brown outfit and white hair of the woman in the outro don't match the blue clothes and green hair of the woman in the intro. Maybe all the dimension hopping messed with poor Larry's brain. He's a few cents short of $1 if you get my meaning. But also there's one image that shows a side rifle and damn, why you gotta be so thick though? Must be all that booty he's holding. Okay, I'll stop now. If you're looking for a cheap way to kill an hour, I'd recommend taking your $1.5 dues of change down to your local wishing well and throwing it in. You won't get your wish granted, but you'll get some fresh air, some sunshine, and maybe even get to touch some grass, which you'll probably need to do if you were even coming close to considering buying this game. Plus, the trip there and back will probably take longer than it does to beat the game. The levels are designed to be frustrating and to waste your time, the art design is lazy, the sound design is somehow lazier, and the devs somehow think it's okay to sell you a 28-page PDF for the same price as the game itself. And that's why my final rating for $100 is an empty purse out of 10. Because the devs are trying to take all your money. Let's see if the final game for today can redeem this video. It's almost, but not quite, the 100% game that everyone has been waiting for. 100% Challenge is like 100% Orange Juice if you were to completely change everything about the game. So, actually, nothing like it, I guess. Except that it's fun and colourful. It kept those parts. Released on the 25th of April 2023 and both developed and published by Findamore, 100% Challenge is a fast-paced arcade score chaser game, and it's the only game they've released on Steam to date. And before we get into the game itself, I just have to say that this is why I love doing this series. It is amazing how many indie devs release a single game and then just vanish forever. Maybe it's because it's all they ever wanted to make, or maybe the game didn't get enough attention to encourage them to continue, which is a shame because often the first game is just the flawed foundation for the future good stuff to be built upon. To me, 100% Challenge is exactly that. So let me explain why. Firstly, look at the level of presentation in the main menu alone. It's bright, colourful and inviting, with a menu style that reminds me of Super Smash Bros. Melee, even though it is arguably a lot simpler in execution, and that's okay. In the settings, we have the expected full screen and resolution settings, as well as separate sliders for music and effects, but what caught my eye is the colours setting. I'll come back to why this matters shortly, but for now it's important to know that we also have rebindable controls and even a 2-player mode. To be clear, I haven't played the 2-player modes, and yes, that is a plural because there are both cooperative and versus modes available, so we'll only be judging the game based on the single-player arcade mode, which is the main focus of the game anyway. Let's start where the devs intended, which is the tutorial. This does a pretty decent job of teaching the player the main mechanics. In a nutshell, you play as a wonderfully gloopy orb. I mean, just look at the way this thing wibbles and wobbles as you drag it around with your mouse. It's subtle, but it gives everything in the game a lovely feeling of fluidity and motion. As you play, the arena will begin to fill with enemies, and your goal is to touch an enemy that is the same color as your orb. When you do, your orb will change color, as will the enemies, and the black outer shield will grow in size. You may also notice that the massive 1% in the background increases to 2%. Foreshadowing. Ooh. Your goal is fairly simple. Touch enemies that match your orb color until the outer shield forms a complete circle. This takes 10 matches, at which point everything resets, increases in difficulty, and you repeat the process. After 10 rounds, you'll reach 100% and finish the game. But of course there's more to this. If your outer shield touches an enemy of the same color as your orb, then it simply vanishes. Nothing happens. To avoid this, you can use the left or right mouse buttons to rotate your shield so that you can absorb the ones you want and block the ones you don't. If a different coloured orb touches your outer shield, a coloured inner barrier will appear. Despite being called a barrier, it's actually bad. If this inner circle is completed, you lose. If a wrong coloured enemy touches the orb, it fills up the inner barrier even more. So ultimately the best tactic is not to touch wrong coloured enemies at all. That's easier said than done, as especially in later levels you'll be dodging swarms of enemies constantly. The inner barrier can be reduced though by allowing an orb of a colour present in the inner barrier to touch an enemy of the same colour. As an example, if I have an orange segment in the inner barrier, I can collide any part of that inner barrier with an orange enemy to make it vanish. This leads to an interesting tug of war between trying to allow the correct coloured orbs past both layers, but catch certain colours on the inner barrier while also avoid anything else. In case you hadn't gathered by now, this is a pretty fast-paced, skill-based game where some clever on-the-fly thinking and decision-making is required, combined with precise movement as well. So, how did this play out for me? Well, not great. But also not as bad as I expected. It actually only took me a total of 75 minutes to beat the arcade mode, which is arguably the main game, but it did take several attempts and clever use of the in-game upgrade system. At the end of each run, you'll be given a score based on 4 different factors: your total progress towards 100%, the time you took, a bonus for any handicaps applied, and for the number of wrong matches you made. Some math happens, and then you're given a final score and some skill points. Skill points are spent in between rounds on a pretty nicely designed wheel, which is again split into 4 sections. These are given fancy names, but ultimately boil down to make things easier, get more points, move better, or be more defensive. I focused on 3 skills in particular: one that made special enemies appear less frequently, one that made the opening in the outer barrier larger, a nice risk-reward system as it's easier to capture the correct enemy but also easier to get hit, and one that reduces the inertia from moving to make the orb easier to control. This was enough to get me through to the 100% completion point, but it's nice that there are a variety of abilities so that you can tailor the experience to what works best for your particular playstyle. What I liked less is how confusing the skill point system is. You can see here that I have 92 skill points, and that the simplification skill has 0 out of 6 shown on the left. I thought this meant I'd need to spend 6 skill points to upgrade the skill, and subsequent upgrades would get more expensive. But in a weird unexplained twist, each skill point moves you 1% towards upgrading a skill, meaning that my 92 skill points will buy me literally nothing. You need at least 100 to upgrade a skill, and then this skill can be upgraded a total of 6 times. Would have been nice if this were explained somewhere to reduce confusion. Just saying. What is quite nice is how the audio and visuals combine. To address yet another elephant in the room, don't know how we managed to fit 2 in here, yes, the music is all by Kevin MacLeod. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing. In fact, I would argue that the music has been used in an extremely effective way here, and it's a great example of how to overcome a weakness if composing music isn't your forte. All of the song choices are thematically similar, quite upbeat with techno-adjacent vibes, which feels fitting for an arcade game of this nature. Not only that, but the music changes at every 10% milestone, keeping things fresh as you play through and making each new phase feel like more of an achievement. On top of that, the background pulses in time with the beat of the music, as do the particle effects that trail behind the enemies, allowing your brain to focus on the gameplay while your senses are absorbed by the visuals. I understand that this could feel a bit overwhelming for some players, but personally it reminded me of Audio Surf, a great title from 2008. Well, gotta love a reminder of how old I am. I was playing this in high school, dang it. Nothing like a gut punch from left field to remind you of your age. Anyway, my point is that from an audio-visual and game feel perspective, 100% Challenge is a joy to play, and it deserves high praise for that. Once the arcade mode is finished, you could continue playing to max out the skills, or you could take on Ultimate Challenge mode and fight for placements on the Hall of Fame global leaderboard. It's not my jam, but I always appreciate it when a mode like this is present, as I know that a lot of players love chasing leaderboards like these for fame and glory. Although the total playtime for 100% Challenge is relatively short if you measure it by the arcade mode alone, the additional modes can add a lot of longevity to the title. Even so, I wouldn't expect this to become anyone's main game. There simply isn't enough depth here. Considering that the game is completely free though, there is more content here than I was expecting when I went into it, and surprisingly, none of it is hidden behind a paywall. There are no microtransactions, paid unlocks, nothing. And in this day and age, that's nothing short of a miracle. Honestly, the devs deserve praise and more attention for that decision alone. As mentioned earlier, they even added colorblind modes to the game, and considering the color matching nature of the core gameplay mechanics, this should be a no-brainer to most people. Yet, it is overlooked in a lot of modern games, even in the AAA scene, to this day. So, good on the devs for including it in a free product. That said, my experience isn't without complaints. As mentioned, I think the skill system is unclear, but that's relatively minor. Personally, I want to stress that this is a personal point. I'm just not a huge fan of how the outer shield works. Why am I being punished for blocking colours I don't want? It feels like it should be the other way around. The outer shield can block any colour except the colour of your orb, so you get punished for not correctly catching it with your shield. You could argue that this might make the game too easy, and in a sense I'm inclined to agree. This could be balanced by having the shield only be able to withstand a number of hits before needing to recharge, or by having enemies that can't be blocked by the shield. Maybe enemies and projectiles behave differently. There are a lot of possibilities, but as the game currently stands, it feels to me that it's overly reliant on the player being able to dodge rather than using the shield in any inventive or interesting way, which feels like a missed opportunity. Again, that's my personal take, and maybe I'm asking too much from a game that is literally free. Flaws aside, I think this is worth a play, even if just to support the devs, and that's why my final rating is simplification out of 10. Sometimes keeping to one core idea and refining it is the best path to take, and here the devs have provided a great example of that. Thanks for watching. Welcome to the end of the video. Today's Larry was sponsored by Lexus LFA 554 and Barry was sponsored by Neggy Malevolent. As always, thank you to all the members on screen for supporting the channel, and a special thank you to our Knight of the Holy Grail, Freaky Feline. That's all for now, so if you've made it this far, here's a sneak peek of the next game. And until next time, take care.